Everyone remembers their first. For some, it is a romantic dance with a tall, mysterious stranger, or a jaunt at sunset with a poetic soul. For others, it was a tumble with a knight in shining armor, or a snow-flecked rendezvous with a bright-eyed ragamuffin. Everyone remembers the point at which they broke through the barrier, passed the pain threshold, and fully embraced the challenging but fair worlds of the Souls games. Once you get it, you get it. These games have been accused of being obtuse, with an unforgiving point of entry that stands in bright neon contrast to your standard AAA title. And that can alienate people. It certainly alienated me. I had sampled Souls of both the demon and dark variety and couldn't make it very far past the opening stages. When Bloodborne first came along, I had much the same experience. I got bodied early on, locked the game away, and then went on with my life. But for some reason, I kept coming back to those opening areas in Yharnam to give it another go. While I found the gameplay frustrating at times, why can't I level up until I kill this boss? It was still thrilling to pick off a pack of enemies one by one, and the setting and presentation was more detailed and mesmerizing than anything I had seen before in gaming or any other medium up to that point. And then it finally happened. I broke through. My muscle memory adapted to the aggressive push-pull of the combat, and I learned to treat every room like a trap. I found myself actually enjoying it and not just throwing myself again and again against a brick wall. After that, I wondered how I didn't love this game from the very beginning. So for me, my first was a moonlight encounter in a cemetery with a member of the clergy. Hand-holding, it's great. You get the comfort of a loved one's claw-like grip wrapped around your hand, with the added bonus of potentially spreading any contagious diseases that they may have phlegmed into their fingers that day. But there's also a bad side, especially when it comes to video games. Let's take a trip back to the distant past of 2009. The 7th generation of consoles saw the Wii leapfrog over their hardcore competitors and straight into most families' living rooms. Nintendo promoted it to appeal to all ages, demographics, and skill levels, and ended up selling more than 100 million consoles. Sony and Microsoft wanted in, so accessibility became the name of the game. Suddenly, the people who referred to every single game as the Space Invaders were getting into gaming and trying it out for the first time. And that's cool. Accessibility is a good thing. Not every game has to be Ninja Gaiden. This new demographic was mainly being sold party games, often based around plastic peripherals. But action games wanted a piece of the pie too. Games started to put more of an emphasis on tutorials, hints, objective markers, and huge text on the screen that told you exactly what to do. No player would be allowed to have a second of confusion or indecision. Some games even allowed you to skip sections entirely if you repeated them too many times without success. There were many who thought games were destined to just become less and less interesting, without the challenging gameplay and alluring mystification that was typical of their old-school counterparts. Games just didn't seem as rewarding anymore. Enter From Software. In 2009 saw the release of Demon's Souls on the PS3, a revolutionary title that gave players an attainable sense of achievement in a dark fantasy world. While sales picked up dramatically over time, it was only considered a modest commercial success upon release. However, this was enough to give the game a spiritual sequel in the form of Dark Souls in 2011. It streamlined many of the previous game's issues by implementing its notably higher budget into a seamless open world and improved mechanics. The director of both games, Hidetaka Miyazaki, was instrumental in these games' success. In both development cycles, he prioritized the sense of achievement and not the difficulty, as the marketing of both games would have you believe. With these games being well received, both critically and commercially, Miyazaki was approached by Sony to develop a brand new IP for their 8th generation console. Ultimately, this meant he would have to step aside as director of Dark Souls 2, acting only as a supervisor. Instead, that game would be co-directed by Tomohiro Shibuya and Yui Tanimura. While considered by many to be a critical success, it does suffer from Miyazaki's absence. It succeeds largely on the momentum created from prior games, as opposed to any new innovations. But this would not be the case with Bloodborne. At a very early stage, Miyazaki stated that Bloodborne would possess a lot of Demon Souls DNA and level design. This might have seemed unusual to players who first came into contact with his work after the unprecedented success of Dark Souls. It was that title that brought this style of hardcore gaming into the public's eye, and also which continued to enjoy its notoriety for its more iconic moments. However, it was telling and even encouraging to hear that Miyazaki was taking inspiration from Demon Souls rather than Dark Souls. Because Demon Souls innovated, whereas Dark Souls refined. Demon Souls invented the wheel, while Dark Souls smoothed out the edges. And in taking inspiration from Demon Souls, Miyazaki made his message clear. This was going to be something entirely new. In 2015, the PS4 finally got its killer app. A visceral, blood-drenched journey through a Lovecraftian wasteland. Gone were the noble knights of the Souls games, replaced with lumbering monstrosities and disfigured nightmares, complemented with an overarching sense of panic and frenzy. While the Souls games might arguably have more depth, there's no question that Bloodborne offered a more balanced experience. It allowed players in at a lower skill floor, but presented a skill ceiling the height of a cathedral. Those looking to get from start to finish would have an easier time, sure. But the beauty of the experience is how much the game teases you with the possibility of just blasting through its gauntlet of enemies. The new health drain mechanic means that, if you're hit, you can quickly regain some health by striking back quickly. It's a risk-reward system that ties in with the sense of panic the game strives for, and it exploits your confidence in much the same way the Souls games exploited your carelessness. This new mechanic encouraged a more aggressive approach from the player, and made the player feel less like an isolated soul in a sea of misery, and more like a desperate hunter battling against the onslaught of unknowable foes. As Miyazaki himself says, the regain system was something we came up with to encourage the sense that you're fighting a life and death struggle, one of the teams supporting this game's battle system. It changes the concept of your defense to something proactive, and it invites you to take a more fatalistic approach to fighting, encouraging that to-the-death feel. That was both the inspiration for and the aim of the regain system. In central Yharnam, the first area of the game, there is a street with a conga line of low-level enemies who, by themselves, pose no challenge whatsoever. One enemy can be taken out with just half a stamina bar. 2 enemies, no problem. 3, 4... Suddenly, your cockiness has cost you all your progress and you've been set back 10 minutes. This is a game that wants you to feel impatient. It wants you to think you're better than this. Playing Bloodborne with a Dark Souls mindset is like stopping for traffic lights in Grand Theft Auto. The beauty of the game is that the line between feeling perfectly capable and utterly overwhelmed is razor thin. There are a lot of factors at play that subtly encourage you to play fast and loose with enemies. For one thing, the time spent managing your weapons and equipment loadouts has been dramatically reduced. While late-game weapons are still more powerful when fully upgraded, The overall arsenal is fairly evenly stacked. Your starting weapon will likely see you to the end because not only have you invested the most in it, it will also be the one you're most comfortable using at that point. The actual functionality of your weapons has increased in Bloodborne, thanks to multi-purpose trick weapons. The playing styles are just different enough to make you reluctant to switch weapons unless there's a considerable bonus for doing so, which there rarely is. There's no limit on the amount of items you can carry. Enemies are more plentiful but have less health overall, making your journey more of a slaughterfest than a tactical advancement. And provided you can keep your kill streak going, you will be never low on health vials. The release of Astro's Playroom has got me thinking about Bloodborne's place within the list of Sony exclusives. You can find little Easter eggs for a host of games like Horizon Zero Dawn and Uncharted in Astro's Playroom. And there's the Hunter as well, in their funny little hat, hacking away at grass. Adorable. Most Sony exclusives, and a lot of action games from the last decade, all seemed to follow a formula set down by Naughty Dog with the Uncharted and Last of Us games. Players would follow a tightly scripted path, with a linear story and streamlined combat mechanics. Even when these types of games went open world, they limited the player's ability to stray from the beaten path in any meaningful way. Story and setting variances aside, these games could blend into each other easily, which is as much a consequence of successful and profitable game design as it is of sterilized creativity. Bloodborne, while moulding some of the more obscure elements of the Souls series into something more inviting, still has an air of mystery and potential discovery that is rare in mainstream games. The story ignores almost all traditional character-based narrative design and story beats. Instead, it prefers to wrap its mystery around the gothic world presented to us. The Hunter is a blank cipher that the player can roleplay in any way they want, which is not only reflected in the story, but also in the raft of equipment and playstyles that you can utilize in the game. The story presents us with many deliberately confusing elements, obsessed as it is with disease, institutional malice, moon worship, and of course blood. This is a far cry from the more relatable genre stories found in its peers, but it doesn't make the world any less compelling. The genius of Bloodborne is that all this mystery and thematic depth is there for the player if they want it. But the game manages to be enthralling even if the player chooses to completely ignore these elements. Mechanically, the game also sets itself apart in terms of pacing. Set pieces in Bloodborne, while just as painstakingly crafted as those found in most modern action games, somehow feel more emergent. Maybe this is because, apart from the brief introductory cutscenes that announce each boss fight, control is very rarely taken from the player. Popular game design would tell us that we need to bookmark the start and end of each new section of gameplay with a cutscene that gives the player some context for the event. In Bloodborne, the world feels like it would go on existing even if the player wasn't there. Any encounter the player has is purely the whim of an unforgiving world. This instills the sense that every room is a trap of some kind, a quality which is even more potent in the other Souls games. This forces the player to proceed with caution, but that feeling goes once you become more adept at combat and you start to relish the challenge. This design choice harkens back to Resident Evil 4, where each section feels like a new puzzle for the player to work out, and almost serves as a direct conversation between the player and designer. I knew you would run through that door when you saw the shiny treasure. Have some debt. This comparison to RE4 is ironic in a way, because it was a progenitor to many of the modern action games mentioned previously. Likewise, we are seeing the influence of the Souls series in plenty of contemporary action games. Sometimes as a direct imitation of the style, other times by taking some of the mechanical design of these games and streamlining them to fit within a more conventional narrative. Some games don't even wear the influence on their sleeves, but it's there nonetheless. The hand-holding that made the player feel like a rat in a maze has become more subtle as the years went by. The player wants to feel like they climbed a mountain by themselves, even if they were following your path. Let's be honest, this video could have been on almost any of the games in the Soulsborne family. But Bloodborne has a unique sensibility and atmosphere that sets it slightly apart from the rest. And also because I shouted until the guys agreed that we should choose this instead of Demon's Souls. If you want to hear me guilt trip my friends into picking this game, check out our podcast, the Cardboard Box Item Podcast. Bloodborne gave us a harsh yet compelling environment, an addictive gameplay loop and atmosphere for days. The attention to environmental detail was unmatched, the cast of characters inscrutable and fascinating, and the gameplay loop may be the most satisfying in gaming, outside the rest of the Souls series. Fans are salivating for any morsel of news about the next game by From Software, and a remake of the Proto-Souls game has become the killer app for the PlayStation 5. It's not hard to see why, because as influential as the series has been on other titles, nothing hits like the real thing. If any game and series defined the previous decade, it's the one that's still sending ripples into the next.